I'm doing something unusual tonight that I really have never done before. I was searching in all of my material that I saved for the high holidays, and I came across a sermon that I wrote in 2014. And I had looked at it before, and when I looked at it before, I thought, well, I like this sermon, but I'm never going to ever have a reason to give it again. But I don't feel like I'm plagiarizing anyone, because I wrote every word of this. But I do want you to hear it. I want you to hear it, and I want you to think about what is happening in today's Jewish world and in Israel, and see whether you find the similarities that I did. And also take a look and see whether there's anything that's different. In September 1943, anyone on the ground could hear the loud rumble and metallic clank of the mercilessly rolling train wheels headed for Auschwitz, Poland. The ground itself quivered due to the overly laden cattle cars soon ready to deposit their human cargo at the gates of hell. In September 2003, anyone on the ground would have their attention drawn to the skies as they heard the powerful and penetrating sound of F-15 fighter jets rending the heavens as they circled the very same spot. In September 1943, the trains were packed with Jews headed only to their doom. In September 2003, for the first time, the Jews were in the heavens above Auschwitz. Israeli pilots who were selected because they were grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, there only with one goal in mind: to commemorate the lives of their people, our people, 1 million of them in that spot alone. In the heavens, on those F-15s, the shofar was sounded, the symbolic call to gather together. It is October 2014. And now we are together on this Day of Atonement, which is when I wrote it, to commemorate both the horrors of 1943, the strength of 2003, and the hope in the midst of uncertainty of our time. There was one big problem that year, 2003. The Auschwitz Museum, built on the site of the concentration camp and run by Poles, didn't like the idea of Israeli planes flying over. They didn't like it one bit. Their spokesperson asserted it's a cemetery, a place of silence and concentration. Their word, not mine. Flying the F-15s is a demonstration of military might, which is an entirely inappropriate way to commemorate the victims. The museum didn't like the show of Israeli might. It was inappropriate. And in that brief but scathing criticism lies the reality of much world response to Jews, not just then, but now. Jewish strength is always inconvenient. Jewish capitulation, our murder, or better yet, our suicide, seems always the more acceptable choice. So let me interject. I don't know if you've read it, but Dara Horn recently, in this time, wrote about this in the book, People Love Dead Jews. Back to 2014. And yet, from our vantage point in 2014, we know that the only way to have commemorated those Jews whose lives were turned away at Auschwitz was with Israeli fighter jets soaring overhead. There is only one message worthwhile to give in commemoration, And that is, we are strong, we will protect Jewish lives when threatened, and if we had F-15 jets in Israel and young fighters in September 1943, we would not have needed a nice cooperative commemoration of 1 million Jewish Auschwitz murders on Yom HaShoah, or silent marches of thousands of youth during the March of Living each year. Ask people who have been on the march what it felt like to enter that camp, and ask them how the tears and profound relief came when they saw the young Israeli soldiers enter after them, carrying the Torahs, when they knew that they were not alone. That is what I felt. Maybe you will choose to go on any upcoming Federation community mission to Poland and Israel for the march, because adults can do that too, and you can experience it for yourselves. The pure and simple, historically supported fact is that our people during the Shoah had no one to fight for them, and now we do. But we American Jews, seduced until very recently by 70 years of peace and acceptance, maybe not even 70 years if we take time to remember the quotas and restrictions of the 40s and 50s, we seduced ones could no longer picture what life was like for us around the world before we had Sahal and jets and tanks and defenders, and we took too much for granted. We equivocate now and speak apologetics and unbalanced criticisms of Israel, and by rhetoric that fabricates history and tells us that everything would be wonderful for we Jews and little Israel if they would just not be so militaristic, so strong, such oppressors. Even those of us who consider ourselves Zionists and supporters of the Jewish state have been taken in. Now, in the time of the new and growing fearless anti-Semitism, which haters attempt to disguise in anti-Israel rhetoric, there are many emergent voices who say that we Jews deserve what we get since we have caused the anti-Semitic flare-up. Let me just point to one incident. Just a few weeks ago, the Episcopal head chaplain at Yale University responded in the New York Times to an op-ed piece by Dr. Deborah Lipstadt at Emory University, who wrote about growing anti-Semitism in Europe. Lipstadt quoted chants from a rally in Berlin, where marchers said, "Hamas, Hamas, Jews to the gas," and revealed that people excused this chanting as a Muslim emotional response to Gaza. Remember, this is 2014. But she reminded, this isn't about Gaza. This has been going on for a very long time. The Hamas Charter is not new. It calls on adherents to prepare for the next round with the Jews, the merchants of war. The text says, "Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, 'O Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him.'" I had never heard of the text, but it was so shocking that I couldn't believe it was true, so I looked it up in the actual document, and it was true. And yet, the chaplain wrote in his letter that anti-Semitism in Europe comes in direct parallel to the violence in Gaza, stalled peace talks, and occupation. He suggested that the antidote for anti-Semitism would be for Israel's patrons abroad to pressure Netanyahu. Only after there was an intense negative reaction to his letter did he apologize. Not in the New York Times, where his vile comments were published, but to the students of Yale, and he resigned, saying nothing done in Israel or Palestine justifies the disturbing rise in anti-Semitism in Europe or elsewhere. His words were too little, too late, and he didn't ring true. We have a huge problem. People hear things like what he initially purported and believe it. Even Jews. and soon the lies become the common refrain. We are the warmongers. We attack the innocent. We stole the land. We are newcomers to Eretz Yisrael instead of hearing the truth, that we have not started a war in the region. We have responded to attack and terror and to rocket after rocket with targeted, measured response. We have not deliberately tried to kill a Palestinian child. In fact, we have tried in vain to warn innocents living next to where Hamas functions. We have not desired to have a presence in Gaza or the West Bank, but the world chooses to ignore that the rockets began to rain down in Gaza right after Israel unilaterally withdrew. You must remember the images of Israelis being physically removed from their homes in Gaza by Israeli soldiers as Israeli presence was ended there. See what that has wrought. Greg Behrman, my friend and our congregant, collects antique maps and books from the 1800s through the early 1900s through the establishment of the British Mandate of Palestine. He gave me a book from the early 40s, and to be truthful, I was afraid to look at it because I was too scared that its demographics would prove that Jerusalem and environs had been filled with Arabs and housed only a handful of Jews. Even I bought into the current propaganda. But the book said quite another thing. In 1942, before the influx of survivors of the Holocaust, over 900,000 residents were Muslims. It's true. Many from North Africa and Egypt, but also from the area, but virtually 500,000 Jews, many of who had been living in the land literally since biblical times, and for tens of generations, and many who had arrived in times past from both the Sephardic world and Europe. When you consider how vast the Arab world is and was, even then, and how minuscule the Jewish sphere, 500,000 Jews already in what would become Israel post-Holocaust is quite a presence. Those who assert that the Jews in Israel are Europeans claiming the land after the Holocaust are liars pure and simple. We are past due for educating ourselves about the real history of Israel. This is not about Palestinians, Hamas and Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, Hezbollah, or the latest war. This is about a long and concerted effort to achieve an ultimate goal that has never changed, ridding themselves of the problem of a Jewish state at all. Some of you may have read the book Son of Hamas by Mossab Hassan Youssef, the son of Sheikh Hassan Youssef, a founding leader of Hamas. Mossab decided as a young man that Hamas was intent only on violence and killing both Israelis and their own people, and entered into an arrangement with the Mossad and Shin Bet to thwart them. In his book and in person, he says that he cannot try to be politically correct, as Americans try to be. His truth is that there is no way to compromise about the recognition of the existence of a Jewish state in the Middle East. For them, he believes it's simply not political. Politics can be dealt with. It's religious. They will never accept Jewish sovereignty on land they believe is now theirs, no matter what the biblical and historical reality. And these aren't my words. Some of you have read them. These are the statements of a person who separated from his family, was disowned, and put his life on the line to stop the violence perpetrated by Hamas, the democratically elected government of Gaza. The difficult perspectives by Mossab Hassan Youssef are not just about current realities. In 1947, Arab League Secretary Azam Pasha said this was about compromise with the plan for a Jewish state. The Arab world is not in a compromising mood. It's likely that your plan is rational and logical, but the fate of nations is not decided by rational logic. Nations never concede, they fight. You won't get anything by peaceful means or compromise. You can perhaps get something but only by the force of your arms. We shall try to defeat you. Some are still trying. With the rise of Iran and places like Qatar funding terrorism worldwide, along with the onslaught of the terror organization formerly called ISIS, some Arab nations are so terrified that they even may be willing to work with Israel. Maybe. Side comment. We now have an Abraham Accord. We should note that during the Gaza war, they never said a word in criticism. In 1968, the esteemed Jewish philosopher theologian Emil Fackenheim wrote that he feared that we were already forgetting the lesson of the Holocaust as the years passed. We had forgotten quickly that it's not always true that people are good, progress real, and brotherhood inevitable. We thought that once, when we existed in the cultural and educational Eden of Germany and Western Europe, and discovered that it meant nothing with regard to true humanity. Many of us keep asserting the same beliefs now. It's part of the confluence of American hope and American naivete, but we should have learned now. Because of Auschwitz, Fackenheim said, we can never be sure of goodness, progress, and human connection, but neither may we despair and cease to hope and work for it. That is the beauty of Jewish life, that we stay rooted in our historical experience, but always work toward a better time. If the Holocaust taught us anything at all, it is that we can never sacrifice Jewish existence on the altar of future humanity. That kind of sacrifice is false. In his book, the philosopher quotes the work written in 1968 of a left-wing socialist Israeli writer, publishing in the Hebrew newspaper Yediot Achronot. In 1968, this man, a dove, willing to sacrifice all for peace, came to the realization that he could not follow the path of his ancestors, many of whom believed that it was better to be killed than kill. That was a perspective before Auschwitz that we must never allow to take hold again. Amos Kanon wrote in June 1968, "Why should I return his gun to the bandit as a reward for having failed to kill me? I want peace, 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 direct talks, indirect talks, all this is immaterial, but peace. I am ready to give everything back in exchange for peace, and I shall give nothing back without peace. And if you force me to become a conqueror, I will become a conqueror. And if you force me to become an oppressor, I shall become an oppressor. And if you force me into the same camp with all the forces of darkness in the world, there I shall be." Once again, I remind you, this article was not written in 2024 or 2014 or 2003, but in 1968. Peace was the force of Israeli hope and intention then, and it remains their yearning all these years later. Peace, but not suicide. And now peace only with the recognition of Israel as the Jewish state. The same perspective post-Gaza war is now held by many, many Jewish leaders all over the world. Enough is enough. We need to stand up for ourselves and each other so that we must have and may have a positive future. We are now, as a people in Israel and throughout the world, experiencing horrors and the most dark days since the time of Auschwitz. We will speak up loudly and in a sustained way for Israel. Will we go and stand side by side with our brothers and sisters in Israel and Europe despite dangers? Will we organize to call or write in government and media when someone tries to use modern ignorance and apathy to rewrite history and uses lies as a political tool? Will we recognize and forcefully turn aside the canard that Israel is responsible for all of the world's and Jews' problems? It is time for us to realize that we're at a crucial juncture. As Jews, we must seek peace and justice. It is the demand of our God as outlined in our rabbinic law. But as Jews, we must seek this while valuing ourselves and the future of our own people first. We and our brothers and sisters today, who in some of our lifetimes have sustained the worst imaginable human horror, a horror that has affected us all, which has changed our communities and our Jewish lives and psyches in unfathomable ways. And still, we are waiting to be comforted and assured of peace, obstacle-free. As it says in Yom Kippur in the Haftarah, care for the poor and hungry, do acts of justice, and I would add, raise healthy children, walk safely to shul in France, play in above-ground yard in Sderot, have a Shabbat dinner in a home in southern Israel, free from the fear that someone will tunnel in below and emerge to kill them. We are all Israel. When do we think it's okay to defend ourselves? And if we are in danger, how long will it be once again that it is not only us but everyone? The former editor of the New Republic, Martin Peretz, once said, even though the world seems to accept the routination of the killing of Jews, one of the fundamental and actionable principles of Zionism is that Jewish blood is no longer cheap. It follows that it won't pass without an accounting, without being avenged, and not just for vengeance' sake, but to bring about the elimination of the organized blood sport in Jewish lives. My colleague, Rabbi Daniel Gordis, who made Aliyah many years ago and was once the assistant rabbi here at Adat Ariel, published a book that I still recommend highly, If a Place Can Make You Cry, Reflections about the Matzav, the situation, as Israelis call it. After a terrorist attack, he overheard two men in Israel arguing, 30 years, there won't be an Israel. Of course there will be. Well, it might be called Israel, but it won't be a Jewish state. You know what the problem is? We're too good to live in this neighborhood. We're not willing to be the animals that you have to be to live in this part of the world. Why would all our young kids stay here? Why should they raise their kids in this? They won't. They're going to leave. They don't know it yet, but they will. We've lost this war. We just don't want to admit it. This country is finished. We gave it a try, this bit of having a country, but it was just the wrong time, in the wrong place. Chaval, pity. No? Rabbi Gordis writes that this continues to be a theme heard in many quarters. We live in a part of the world drowning in an ethic that is incomprehensible to me, that has nothing to do with the alleged occupation since 1967. It has to do with our being here at all in this part of the land. For them, it's all or nothing, and there are many more of them. They will sink to depths to which we will not sink, and they know that time is on their side. I still pray for peace, but I know I won't live to see it. I suspect that my children won't either. But we stay, try to raise decent Jewish kids who are both passionate Zionists and moral human beings. Yet, more optimistically, in 2014, over 80% of all Israelis would rather live in Israel than anywhere else. Just as the shofar was sounded on the F-15 flying over Auschwitz, it will be sounded for us tomorrow and the day after and at the end of Yom Kippur. It sounds this time to demand of us what we gather, that we create strength together, that we stop equivocating, stop standing back and simply waiting for the time of evil to pass. We tried that once and we died. Do we want to chance reaching the point where Israeli jets don't fly above Auschwitz? Don't go to Ethiopia and the Sudan to rescue Jews? Don't fly to Haiti to set up medical clinics? And aren't there to offer us a sense of security that there is a Jewish state that we can take for granted? Most of us have never lived in a world without the Jewish state. Can you have any inkling of how vulnerable we were as a people before Israel existed? In 1943, the loud rumbling of the train approaching Auschwitz was deafening and terrifying. Today, the loud rumble and terror of violence acts against us not just in Israel, but in France, Germany, England, Los Angeles, should jolt us out of comfort into action. 2014. I know it wasn't the shortest sermon on record. But something happened that was wrong, that we can't let happen again. Do you notice any similarities between what I wrote in 2014 and what we're experiencing today? But we didn't do a darn thing about it. We didn't take it seriously. Now we must. So thank you for listening to 10 years ago. It's been a lot longer than 10 years that this has been going on. So as we move through this, seeing the kinds of things that Israel has done, as well as they can, to put an end to this once and for all, we need to continue to stand with them. We need to continue to understand why these things are happening now. And we need to educate ourselves to know that it didn't just happen on October 7th.